When I was in college, I read about a wave of African Americans who left the South by the thousands during the Great Migration between 1900 and 1940. My parents never mentioned it, but they were part of that exodus. They arrived in St. Louis 8 years apart and under very different circumstances. Daddy came around 1929 with his mother and stepfather from rural Arkansas so that he could attend high school. There was no high school for blacks near their town in Arkansas, and he was the first in his extended family to go beyond third grade. St. Louis was a hostile city for Black Americans, a former hub of the slave trade with established customs and state laws and zoning policies that mandated segregated schools and neighborhoods. Nonetheless, they considered their move a step up from the impoverished sharecropping life they had left behind just one state away in the South. Mama came 8 years later. She was a pampered, middle-class college student from a small Alabama town where her father, a successful farmer, also owned the colored grocery store. She came to St. Louis to visit relatives while on summer break. After my parents met that summer, and again the next winter break, they soon married. My mother's life changed dramatically. They settled into a Negro neighborhood in downtown St. Louis called Mill Creek Valley and had 8 children in rapid succession during the decade of the 1940s. Mill Creek was one of the oldest parts of St. Louis, on land first developed by the Osage Nation at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. It had been home to every new European immigrant group that arrived in the city over the previous 100 years. The Central Corridor grew westward, followed the creek that powered one of the first grist mills in St. Louis. The Mill Creek, as it became known, meandered eastward from a spring and emptied into the Mississippi River. Early citizens built grand homes near the shores of the creek. Cattle grazed and watered at its edge. As the city grew, smoke-belching factories and foul-smelling slaughterhouses replaced the pastoral splendor along the bluffs of Mill Creek. Pollution and a cholera epidemic led to the draining of the creek in 1852. Railroad tracks replaced the dried creek bed in the 1890s. The railroad tracks along the former creek bed provided a natural dividing line that eventually bisected St. Louis into North and South ethnic enclaves. Germans and Poles to the north, Irish and Italians to the south. Eastern European Jews began immigrating to St. Louis in large numbers between 1880 and 1920. Many lived in Jewish ghettos they created along the near north side until moving westward from the riverfront as the city expanded. Many of the European immigrants continued to own the dilapidated tenements, substandard row houses, and Victorian mansions turned rooming houses they rented to migrating blacks in Mill Creek.